Me and my kid were headed up St. Mary's to climb around in the Indian Peaks. We were going to do the crossover between James Peak and Mount Bancroft. I had seen his strength develop right before he began spending time at his mom's, 5,000 feet lower. So when we began to climb in the snow gully, he was making an obvious effort to keep up. And I could see that was wearing him down. So I took to scouting ahead on the approach up the mountain and then waiting to regroup with him. On the way up, there were plenty of people, and I noticed this young girl, a young lady, and of course, she was dressed in shorts and light clothing. I was wondering how she was going to fare in the cold at the top, but she was moving pretty fast, so I'm sure it didn't matter. Anyway, I think I briefly chatted with her as we kind of matched step for step, going up the side of the top of the snow gully. And then I think I pointed her in the right direction. She was looking for her friend, and actually I didn't even know who it was, whether it was a he or a she, but she was looking for a friend, and they were going to try to do the same crossover that my son and I were going to do. They were going to try to cross over from James Peak on this knife edge ridge, and with pretty good dropaways on either side. They were going to try to do that, and they had never done it before, and neither had I. But we'd kind of scoped it out. We couldn't see the whole thing because it kept twisting and turning backwards and forwards, like little hairpin ridge turns. So we couldn't see the same thing. It was like kind of hidden. Well, most of it was. Anyway, parts of it were hidden. So anyway, surprise, surprise, right? Why would I run into someone like that? But I did. So I pointed her in the right direction, and I said, "Look, you can probably do it, and especially if you're coming down the other side." She said, "Yes, I was planning on coming down this Mount Bancroft side." And I was like, "Oh, lucky you, because we parked here. We're gonna have to come down this side." But in any case, didn't matter too much. So she went on because her pace was much quicker than ours, than Lucas and mine. And at this point, when I was conversing with her, I was ahead of Lucas, doing that little bit of scouting I mentioned earlier. In any case, she took off, and when Lucas and I rejoined, we just kind of forgot about the whole situation and kept going up, because we had not even gotten to the plains between the snow gully and and James Peak, even like the beginning approach of James Peak. So we were still, had a good trek to go ahead of us. And we did, we climbed up, and there were all these kind of melted away openings where we could see the fast water rushing under the snow gully, and we knew, I better not step in that. Twisted ankle, or then we looked closer and we're like, oh, it's deep in there, but even if we fell down, the water's shallow enough so we're not going to get sucked under and drown. So it was sort of like one of those kind of irrational fears, but nevertheless, these big gaping openings in the snow gully with water, and there's only a little bit of stretch on either side of these openings to pass. You're like, oh my gosh, it looks scarier than it is, but hey. So after the snow gully ended, because it ended in this kind of trenched out embankment that needed to be scaled, it was completely devoid of snow. I think something to do with the wind loading. It probably didn't get wind loaded there, and nowhere else on the plains. The plains are just totally wind scoured. So we made it up the snow gully, and we got to the plains on our way to the Sky Temple, which lied right in the middle of the plain. So we got to the Sky Temple, rested, relaxed, and had some snacks and drinks, and then proceeded on to the approach to James Peak, a very uneventful approach, passing where we had camped the winter before under the full moon, and kind of just acclimating ourselves to the surroundings again, because we were very familiar with it, albeit when it was covered in snow, rather than on this trip, which was in, I would say, 60-degree weather. So up we went, James Peak, and we're kind of getting, I guess, past the first false summit. Now, there's several false summits on James Peak, and the biggest one is called False Summit. That's the name of its formation, because everyone who goes up there climbs the thing and I got on top, but they don't realize, because it looks like it's lower, but far in the distance, across this bowl, there's another face that you need to climb up, and that's the true summit of James Peak. And there's rocks, they call those things cairns. I think they're called cairns. There's rock cairns on top, and some actual markings denoting the altitude, and the fact that it's, well, not the fact that it's a summit, but simply the markings that it is the summit. In any case, on the way up there, because it's not necessary really to go to the summit to make the crossover. On the way up there, before I reached the bowl, who should come down? That girl. I forgot her name. God damn it, I forgot her name. What was her name? Anyway, so I said, hey, would you find your friend? And she's like, what? I couldn't, I went, oh no, duh, what the hell? What's wrong with me? She was with her friend, and no, she wasn't with her friend at that point. My fault. Yes, she was with her friend at that point, because they both decided. They came down, they thought they summited out, they told me that there was no crossover, or at least that they couldn't find it. They couldn't find the crossover from James Peak to Mount Bancroft. Well, I had the pleasure of telling them that they hadn't summited James Peak at all. They succumbed to the temptation of many who first try, and who are not completely aware of the topographical features. They had gone up to the false summit, and thinking that, well, we're at the summit, where's the crossover? There is no crossover, we can't make it over there, we're going back down. But they ran into me, and I properly informed them that what they had done was not, in fact, reach the crossover whatsoever. And I told them the crossover wasn't even at the summit, but it was higher than the false summit. So they decided to follow my directions and turn around from going down and go back up. They were much faster than Lucas and I. I should say Lucas. I'll edit that. In any case, what was going on really was, though they were doing the exact thing that I wanted to do, and it was very necessary for me to run ahead to see if, in fact, they could do it, or what problems they encountered while doing it, I still felt a responsibility to stay with Lucas as much as possible. So I was torn between the two things, but it was necessary, I think, because Lucas was going to consider, in fact, he did consider making the crossover. It's the problem was he considered it after he told me he didn't want to do it. And, the worst time to do anything is after you tell someone you don't want to do it, because they're never going to expect you to do it. So I think eventually Lucas will probably want to do this thing. But at that point, I just wanted to go across, check it out, climb up the other side, and see if there was a possibility of, in the wintertime, snowboarding the other side, the Mount Bancroft, and behind Mount Bancroft, Perry's Peak side. Perry Peak side was more interesting because the faces of Perry Peak was, I think they were nearly like 60 degrees down, and the really, really steep with spines. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is like straight out of a ski movie. I gotta try this if it's safe. So, I started investigating. We did some preliminary recon, wanted to find out, get some data to figure out how often they're going to slide or what to do to test if they're going to slide. So, this is the process that's going on with me right now. In any case, I wanted to see what these folks were doing because I hadn't gotten as far as they were going, or at least as far as I thought they were going. But the problem was, when we got to the top, I kept running ahead, and then they kind of like... So they were behind me, and Lucas was behind them, and I was going ahead, and then I was out sort of in the, near the middle of the ridge. No, near the beginning part of crossing, and I hadn't quite begun the part where it definitely separates itself from two mountains, sort of like a web between two digits, like a duck's web, thin and sort of like with those like pointy little waves going across it. And so at some point it was even necessary for me to like ride it like a hobby horse, but just inch my way because I was really nervous. In any case, I felt inclined to return to where Lucas was. I didn't want to go another step further. And at that point, the girl and her friend caught up with me and started going out. Like, initially I felt like I should leave because I was the one who described it from the begin with. But at that point I couldn't go on any further, and I started asking them. I was like, so what do you see? Is it impassable? Can you do it? And I didn't make them any promises that they could get across. I said, this is where the crossover is. I don't know if you can make it or not. I don't know if it's unbroken. I don't know what condition it's in. I know that I tried it in the snow, and half of the snow fell off as I was going across, and I almost fell off with it. So, they understood that they were going to lead if necessary, and that's what they ended up doing. So they led across it, and I got a few steps further out behind them. And then, I turned around, and there I saw Lucas, and I was like, oh, Lucas, do you want to try it? And he's like looking at it, and it looked really daunting. I don't blame him. He's like, I don't know why it possessed me, but I guess I was so enthusiastic about getting the other side and surveying that area that, I kind of didn't even pay attention to the danger. So I scooted across, and that couple was in front of me. And I don't think they knew that I was back there, but they might have not. I wasn't sure. I think they saw me at one point. And, I began to catch up with them as we were climbing up the side. Well, it's sort of like there's a line between Mount Perry and Mount Bancroft, and we're slightly on the Mount Bancroft side, but like almost facing closer to Mount Perry. Perry Peak, rather, not Mount Perry. In any case, they broke off toward Bancroft, and I broke off toward Perry Peak because I'm, wanting to check it out. But at the top, at the summit of this wide, dusty, flat section of mountain that's undefinable between two that it sits between, we came up and I saw them, and they were a good maybe 50 yards from me. 50? 25 yards. They're about 25 yards from me. Because I could see them pretty clearly, and they'd begun getting undressed. So, I couldn't believe it at first. I'm like, then I realized, this is the perfect place, if alone, to enjoy intimacies with a lover. It's almost enthrallingly heaven-like. So they were disrobing, and they were beginning to embrace, and I found myself kind of drawing closer to them. So they were really languid about their it was strange. They were on top of this mountain, but they were kind of just being very kind of tender and affectionate with each other in a very kind of slow-paced way. So, it was kind of amazing, and I found myself all of a sudden standing right next to them, and unfortunately, I startled them. I didn't realize that they didn't know that I had been there the entire time. I figured that they were in as full plain sight. As they were in such full plain sight, so was I to them. But I suppose that they had focused on each other to such a degree that they were oblivious to all the situation, the surroundings on this unlikely of places to have one's privacy invaded. Nevertheless, was it privacy at all? So I kind of shrunk back when that happened, and excuse me, sorry, and moved away and went back to the part of the ridge that was facing Perry Peak rather than Mount Bancroft. And I went as high as I could and came back down and inched my way back across the crossover, met up with Lucas, and we headed down the mountain and back to the cabin.